live visuals coming in there from Bharat Mandapam at this point in time, where Prime Minister Modi is hosting a series of leaders as they enter, and the deliberations, of course, expected to start in just about an hour from now. Visuals, look at the grandeur of it. I think that amazes me, notwithstanding that we've spent about 4,000 crore rupees to host that G20 Summit. Some would say the money is worth spending, Kartik. This is as big as it's going to be a show of display of India's grandeur, and also perhaps putting in place quick fixes to prepare Delhi to host these many people.
So, Shweta, being a student of economics, I think it's important to look at the P&L. Right. And if you look at the P&L and if you look at the income statement, anytime you host an event, there is going to be an expense that you incur. But then what is the revenue that you're likely to draw on that event? So I would look at this 4,000 crore rupees of investment. I would not look at it as an expense. I would actually look at it as an investment.
All right.
And this is an investment India is making in its future. Now, of course, the investment happens to be by way of red carpets and flags and and hosting multiple global leaders. I believe over a lakh odd number of international tourists or dignitaries are likely to be in India, and hosting them and putting up
this is the IMF chief, of course, walking in to meet Prime Minister Modi, Christina Georgieva. Well, interesting visuals of her dancing to that video yesterday when she was welcomed and grooving perhaps to the music. I don't know if we can pull that video, but it's doing the rounds on social media this morning. She's being greeted there by Prime Minister Modi. Talking about investments, yes.
Fascinating that you're talking about IMF, because we're talking about the multilateral
MDBs.
Development Bank
We're
reforms.
looking at alternatives.
Alternatives to the IMF and the World Bank. But there again, India is saying the fact that we have no issues with the IMF and the World Bank existing. We're just saying that there need to be more of those things, and more of those things that serve the economies of Africa and Asia. There you go. I was just going to mention United Nations chief also in Friday, he landed yesterday, UN chief Antonio Guterres. The moment he landed in India for the G20 summit, making it clear, whatever you do, all of you agree to 1.5 degrees. The climate protocol, climate change, the 1.5, the global temperature should not rise beyond 1.5 degrees. Every country has to commit to it. That's an important point that the UN chief made the moment he landed. I'm sure that's what he's looking at. We've been discussing so much of trade and defense. The other things which don't find enough of talk in other places. It's these global forums where you have to discuss things like climate change and what countries are doing to tackle climate change. Because you can't wait for COP27s and COP28s to happen every single time. G20 forums, G7 forums, where all country leaders are together, are also great opportunities to discuss something like climate change. And with UN chief around, definitely that topic remains as a top headline amongst other things.
So on climate change specifically, again, Krishna, I think the battle has been
President of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, also walking in.
Another proud moment of India, President of World Bank, an Indian coming back to India for a G20 summit where India is the president of G20. Oh, goodness me. The symbolism is incredible.
And I think, again, somebody who has led a business like MasterCard in India for the longest time. This is definitely somebody who understands India's financial prowess, understands the tryst that India has had with Jan Dhan and the tryst that India has had with digitization and fintech. So I think an important moment there for Ajay Banga to be back in India
as the president of the World
presiding
Bank
over World Bank at a time when we are talking about debt restructuring, at a time when we are talking about multilateral development banks to be reformed. I think there is definitely one person sitting on that table who will understand where India is coming from, who will understand where emerging markets
and
are
what
coming
the challenges
from,
are.
and what the challenges are. I think despite leading an American multinational financial institution, credit card company in India, I think this is definitely somebody who understands what what the challenges of debt can mean to emerging markets.
Right, more and more dignitaries.
More and more dignitaries coming and being greeted there by Prime Minister Modi himself. We keep bringing you these visuals, of course. Proud moment for India.
Mr.
A lot of
Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization.
Director General of the World Health Organization also walking in to be greeted by Prime Minister Modi.
विश्व स्वास्थ्य संघ के महानिदेशक.
And as these visuals continue to play up, and perhaps, you know, since we were talking about...
As we speak, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of World Health Organization,
yes,
who's made his way into the Bharat Mandapam. So, wishing him good luck for this G20 Summit from our side.
Again, I think healthcare is something that again happens to be of great concern to emerging economies. I mean, we don't have social security. We don't have, you know, the government fending for our ballooning bills when it comes to affordable healthcare. And affordable healthcare again is something that India has been trying to push. Affordable insurance, affordable healthcare. And these, of course, happen to be very, very important. OECD. Again, in the context of MDB's reforms and redevelopments. I mean, you've got to have sizable and reasonable investments in healthcare. And those can happen only if there is a corpus like the kinds controlled by World Bank, by WHO, by the UN, by the World Bank, when it comes to making sure that these investments actually translate down to the last mile, to the poorest of the poor in the emerging economies.
Absolutely.
And underdeveloped
you know,
economies.
just this morning, and since we're talking about healthcare, just this morning, and a lot of course, people who are also hoping that it's been about just 2 years since the pandemic hit India, and 2 years since we were making those frantic calls to, you know, hospitals to perhaps get oxygen cylinders, and within just 2 years, India is spending a massive amount of cost to host you know, heads of states from 20 countries. A lot of people, of course, also critical of the amount of money that is being spent and worried as to what these investments are. But, you know, as we continue to discuss details, a lot of leaders walking in there, you know, states of head of states, as well as leaders of various agencies and financial institutions
Her
from
Excellency,
all across the world.
Ms. Nozi Okonjo Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization.
All right,
There you go, we're talking
World
trade.
Trade Organization. I don't know if we have you know, some of those graphics that we prepared on trade, because trade agreements, again, very interesting, very important to figure out the various trade agreements that could be arrived on the sidelines of the G20.
I'm just surprised that we have a bilateral with Italy. I'd be curious to know the kind of trade agreements that we end up, you know, being able to sign with Italy. I can understand what we do with, say, Germany. I'm curious to know what are the kind of partnerships, because look at some country like Italy, which took debt from China and was highly criticized by the rest of the European powers and the West for, you know, for getting into the Chinese debt trap, and now they've cancelled that deal
His
with China. They were
Excellency
distancing themselves from taking
Azali
money from China. So I'm curious to know how India can move in and sort of partner with the Italian economy.
And chairperson of the African Union.
I mean, that's the battle that India is fighting, right? On
Absolutely,
behalf
and
of
fighting
the
for
African countries.
Yes.
Yeah, so we are fighting on behalf of African nations. See, I think it's important, if nothing else, at least the leadership that India is trying to take of the global south, and trying to be a statesman in that, and saying that, hey, you know, we are all in it together. We have gone through this. We have gone through the pains of development. We have gone through the pangs of hunger, underdevelopment, and we are breaking those shackles now and emerging as a world power, the 5th largest economy, already slated to be the 3rd largest. And we know the pains of the underdeveloped economies, and we know how debt could hurt us and hurt you. So you know, let's work on it together. So I think it's important to sort of, you know, look at it in that context. And add to that, of course, you know, we were talking about the investments India is making, and we are talking about investments by way of hosting these G20 nations in India, and we were talking about free trade agreements. I think right now it is imperative for other European countries to seize this moment of signing FTAs with India rather than vice versa. I think it is in greater interest for Germany
His
right
Highness
now, which is degrowing,
Sayyid Asad bin Tariq
to find a way to have better trade ties with India, rather than India wanting to strengthen FTA. And other, you mentioned Italy. I think it's the case even with UK, pretty much with every European economy right now, because India is the fastest growing major economy. I mean, there is no other country which is, and ignore the data coming from China, and you know, Chinese data is Chinese data at the end of the day. So a 6%, 6.4% growth rate in China has to be looked at with suspicion, given the ghost factories and given the zero COVID policy and the long lockdown which China emerged from just about 9 or 10 months ago. And look at the kind of sizable growth that India has made. I mean, you know, upwards of 7%, you don't have any economy which
Sheikh
is growing
Hasina
at that rate. Bangladesh, again, of course, a very, very important trade partner for India,
and one of the first bilateral, in fact, conversations that Prime Minister Modi had before the beginning of G20.
Have been signed already with Bangladesh.
Absolutely, and India, of course, trying to keep its position intact as the voice of the global South, and all those initiatives, of course, being made by Prime Minister Modi there, hosting not just G20 countries, but also inviting a lot of countries which are significant and important trade allies of India from Southeast Asia. One country that wasn't invited, in fact, wanted to send its representation, was Ukraine. And we can't talk about G20 without talking about Ukraine, because we know a communique will be hard to arrive at without Chinese presence, without Russian presence. And Russia, of course, is going to be hard-pressed at not having the word conflict be made a part of official communique that will come out of G20, Krishna.
Right, same problem at Bali as well. What is the wording of that final
His Excellency, Mr.
Sisi, unfortunately, those troubles, the cloud of Ukraine war will be present on this G20 summit as well. So that's exactly why arriving at a consensus on those issues, specifically the Ukraine war, I would say is next to impossible. To arrive at a consensus on which way we're going to go as a world, as a grouping. And even arrive at a final statement. So I don't expect anything different from the last Bali summit of G20.
And India's made its position very clear. They said, okay, there may not be a final communique which everybody is going to agree on, but there has to be some communique that goes out. There has to be some consensus, and the consensus has to be largely around economy, financial policy issues, because that's the mandate of G20. So even if you don't agree on what the wordings will be around Russian-Ukrainian conflict, let's agree on other parameters. Let's agree on other recommendations that were made by the working groups, the B20, and a series of meetings that were happening, the FM Central Bank Governors meeting that were happening,
and G20
three meetings.
That's
Absolutely,
a good G20 president. That's what you can do in a situation like this. They'll leave out Ukraine. Let's arrive at consensus on everything else apart from Ukraine. That's a smart move.
And that is what the G20 Sherpa, in fact, said in addressing the media yesterday, that there's going to be a host of issues where consensus will be arrived at. It may not be on the Russia-Ukraine issue.
Jagannath, Prime Minister of Mauritius.
Right, I wonder what conversations on taxation havens and other things can take place with Mauritius.
And that is what Finance Minister also pointed out, right before G20, that there's going to be conversation also on rerouting of money, the tax havens, and that conversation perhaps would be important with Mauritius, which is a safe tax destination, as it would like to call itself, perhaps also too safe for a lot of people who are trying to thwart and avert taxation laws.
Of tax havens, in the context of evasion of tax, it's important to look at the cryptocurrency debate as well. I think our quarrel with cryptocurrencies is to do with tax evasion, is to do with terror financing, is to do with the fact that international transactions can be made without leaving a trace.
His Excellency, Mr. Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Another European power. Netherlands should be looking to do more with India than it has already been. So many Indians, Kartik, in recent times, moved to Europe, moving to Netherlands because it's a great country to live and work in. Their Indian population has been steadily rising in the recent past, and Mark Rutte being here, like you were pointing out, Kartik, a lot of European powers should be looking at India and coming forward to strike as many deals as possible with India. It's in their interest more, as much in industries, if not more, in their interest, because degrowth in European economies, their economies are not growing the way they're supposed to. They're not even growing, they're growing backwards. So, and India is the fastest growing major economy. We love so many of things about Europe because as culture, as produce, from cheese in Europe to wine in Europe to all other things that we love taking from Europe and becoming famous in India as we speak. Netherlands, Mark Rutte being here, I would also count amongst other economies that we discussed, the bigger ones like Germany and Spain and France for that matter. Netherlands is a very significant economy that India should learn to. It's a sea power. It has great advancements on sea. So number of cooperation is so high. I'm just hoping that something happens in Netherlands.
And talk about the startup culture. I think, the Netherlands, all of North Europe, Sweden,
Excellency
Denmark, they've all
Mr.
been so
Bola
bullish
Ahmed
on startups in the fintech space, startups in the
of the
delivery
Federal
space. So I think there are
Republic
great
of
partnership
Nigeria.
opportunities with countries in North Europe.
Well, another country that perhaps India is looking to help in the longer run is, of course, Nigeria. And Nigeria, which is battling its own crisis with poverty, with hunger, with debt. And this is a broader framework. During BRICS Summit as well, India reiterated that it wants to help African nations. It wants to help Nigeria. It wants to help Ghana. And in fact, just yesterday, after Finance Minister met with her US counterpart, she also met with Nigerian FM, where there was talks of extending a credit line to Nigeria if that is needed, perhaps also helping them with their debt management. All of that is going to be discussed further.
Talking about Nigeria, I should need to remind people that the largest economy in Africa is not South Africa, it is Nigeria. And Nigeria has English as the national language. So,
and the Prime Minister of Republic of Singapore there walking in to greet Prime Minister of
Singapore,
India.
which has just gotten a Tamil origin president.
And among the only 3 countries that India has actually opened its rice exports to. Because of the
special ties.
Yeah, special ties.
It said so very
Mauritius,
categorically.
Singapore and Bhutan, if I'm not mistaken,
that is correct.
The third. So
all the Tamils in Singapore need their rice, Kartik.
Yeah, and Singapore, of course, has a great number of Indians working there, making a living there, paying high taxes as well in Singapore.
Oh, yes.
But I think, again, when we talk about services like UPI, export of UPI, countries where there is a sizable Indian population, where there is a sizable diaspora, are going to be early adopters of a service like UPI if it gets rolled out to the world. So we are talking to
Singapore
UAE already, we are talking to Singapore. And
in fact, it's happening as we speak.
Singapore and Dubai are 2 cities where I think UPI is already gone.
Already happening, or Indians living there are already able to make transactions using UPI. With the partnership, as far as NPCI is concerned, has come through.
Calvino, first Vice President of the Government of Spain and the Minister for the Economy.
Right, another country I love, another economy that can do well with partnering with India, just like Italy, its neighboring economy. 2 ancient cultures, very similar to India in their love for food and culture. These are countries that should be looking. Italy should not be looking at China for partnerships. Italy should be looking at India for partnerships, and Spain.
Italy and Spain both battered during COVID.
Exactly.
Just see what happened to their economies during COVID, and it's going to take a long time, given the demographic disadvantage these countries have, to emerge out of that COVID-induced, hardship. So it is going to be a while before we see these economies coming back in the green and really being able to add not just to the world GDP, but even to their own existence. And that is where debt becomes important. I mean, if you have an aging population and if you are in a position where you don't have a demographic dividend like India or China, how do you get people to work? How much do you get them to work? And how do you pay them? And how do they pay taxes? And how does the wheel of the economy continue to roll? And that is something that, that the European nations will have to look at very seriously right now. So I think the challenge is as much on the emerging markets block as it is with these European economies, which are facing this challenge when it comes to to age not being in favor of their working population.
Fantastic point, Kartik, and that's another reason why they should be with India, because India has a demographic advantage, a young population in terms it can provide anything from
His
talent
Royal
to
Highness
a market.
Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates.
And the President of United
How
Arab
can
Emirates,
we
let's
not
talk
discuss
about
the UAE and
you
stop
have
Europe for a bit.
Yes, UAE, another trade partner of India, where in 2022 India and UAE signed the CEPA agreement, the comprehensive trade agreement, eliminating trade barriers, reducing tariffs between the 2 countries drastically, post which the trade partnership has grown multifold. Some people also say it's grown by as much as 50%. The numbers are, of course, in the realm of speculation at the moment. But UAE, not just an important importer and exporter for India, but also an importer of oil. As India continues to be an importer of oil, UAE is emerging to be a more preferred destination, at least in the last couple of 2 months, as opposed to Russia.
For sure, Shweta. And I also see similarities when it comes to diversification of the economies. So UAE has also been for a long time working towards diversifying its economic interests beyond oil. And so has India. India is diversifying its economic capabilities beyond the services sector. And you see this diversification story playing out well between the two countries. Oil, of course, happens to be the largest trade link between India and the Middle East, and UAE playing a prominent role there. But beyond that, again, we were talking about UPI, and UAE being among the first countries to actually go ahead and install UPI as part of its financial inclusion ecosystem. So there's a great story of financial inclusion. There's a great story of import and export of currency and trade driven technologies, which is where UPI comes in squarely. And add to that this whole diversification that UAE is trying to do, given the fact that these countries also know that if the energy requirements of the world shift from non-renewable to renewable, they won't have much to talk about 20 years, 30 years from now. And all these countries need to hedge their own domestic interests. And if oil is something that will not have the kind of demand and will not command the kind of prices that it does right now, 10 years, 15 years from now, as electric mobility takes over, there's a problem for them.
Sanchez, Minister of the Economy of United Mexican States.
Well, talk about a global platform. We're going to keep taking flights from one region to the other. We took a flight from Europe to UAE, and now we're taking a flight from UAE
to New Mexico
to Mexico, in fact, not just New Mexico City, all Mexican states. Another economy which is not considered like a developed economy, but a developing economy, troubled by things that are similar to what troubles Indian economies and, for the matter, BRICS nations. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of a partnership that we can have with a country like Mexico. So many similarities as civilizations. Old. We're talking about the Incan civilization, the Mayan civilization, the Aztec civilization. Mexico has a very ancient civilization, just like India, was colonized by Spanish people, was called India, finally ended up with an English colonizer. But the same problems, great natural resources, original culture, music, food, Mexican food across the world, as famous as Indian food. So many similarities between Mexico and India, but curious to know what kind of partnership that we can have with Mexico, Shweta.
And look at the visuals coming. I think, it's important to add the kind of camera angles. We've seen over the last 2 years, even the Republic Day parades in India really evolve when it comes to, to the visual display. Using cameras, using technology. It's a delight. I mean, standing here looking at this frame, had you told me that this is a summit happening in, in any other developed country, I would not have challenged that claim. I mean, we know that this is happening in India, but where the gods are also kind, I think it's a nice cloudy day, but not raining right now.
That Nataraj statue, which was gotten in from Tamil Nadu, made in multiple pieces and assembled over here. Again, the symbolism, it is beautiful that the Bharat Mandapam truly ends up being representative of India as a nation, although it's there present only in Delhi. It's sort of, something for all Indians to connect with, and the beauty of Indian craftsmanship. Let's not forget, one of the oldest exports from India was India's craftsmanship, be it crafting diamonds or jewelry or statues. And bear in mind, Indian statues, these statues are extremely highly regarded and revered in the world, in the art world. Hence, it's a good time for us to sort of hold this moment and take in that statue, because let's face it, there is also this huge, statue, smuggling business that goes around the world, and that's simply because, of the beauty of the Indian craftsmanship, the rarity of Indian craftsmanship, the quality of Indian craftsmanship. So that being on display at the Bharat Mandapam as the dignitaries walk in, that's like reminding the world, hey, remember this? I'm sure you haven't forgotten this. This is what we were first famous for a long, long time ago. So that's what I think that statue would represent to all the global dignitaries who are walking in.
Right, a representation of India's people, its culture, and the Nataraj statue there. I think we got to long, sort of display of information and a display of how much my colleague Krishna knows about the statue, that giant Nataraj statue which is outside Bharat Mandapam, installed and brought in from Tamil Nadu. All right, and since we continue to talk and as more and more leaders arrive, let's come back to a serious conversation that we were having by the way of what's going to come through after this summit, the summit which will conclude tomorrow afternoon. It's going to be an action-packed day today up until tomorrow afternoon, post which India is going to hand over the baton of G20 presidency to Brazil. So it's going to be Bali, then India, and now Brazil, which is where it's going to happen next year. All of this culminates into a long list of items which are on the agenda, and I think a final declaration, a final communique is what we were discussing, Krishna, and it's going to be a difficult communique to arrive at, as I said, because of the obvious absence of Xi Jinping, as well as, Mr. Putin, who made it clear that he's not going to be making it through to the event, and also extended his greetings, also congratulated India and showed confidence in India's presidency, except showing
I think, technically it's not possible for him to show up if he's on the International Criminal Court.
No, I'm not blaming him for it.
How does he step out of his country? I mean, he can't risk getting arrested in the middle of a war that he has initiated unprovoked. And continues to wager on a year and a half into the war. I mean, and it's not that
and India officially also disagrees with that. India on an official line, India says that we've got nothing to do with the ongoing conflict, calling it a conflict, by the way.
President of Argentina.
All right, and that's of course President of Argentina walking into the Bharat Mandapam. But India's official stance, and G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant made it very clear: we have nothing to do with the ongoing conflict. What we care about is our people. We care about
our economic interests. I think it is as simple as that.
And we would like to be non-partisan. We would like to continue to sit on the fences. We don't want to be a participant to what's happening, as far as this geopolitical interest and interest of Western economies. Because even, in fact, just yesterday, after meeting with Indian Finance Minister Janet Yellen, also spoke about why helping Ukraine is going to be a top priority for Western economies.
I mean, the Western economies obviously want to stand up to this regional bully called Russia. I think there is absolutely no doubt that if this war were to ever end, we know where the Western world's interests and allegiances lie.
Right.
So it is fairly obvious.
Mr. Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia.
Oh, the far end of the world from where Mr. Albanese has come, Australia. The one country, Shweta, that we actually have a free trade agreement with, that is signed, sealed and delivered. So bear in mind, when you look at Mr. Albanese, all that Indians have to think about at least is that, hey, one important developed country, might not be the biggest by any stretch of imagination, but definitely a country where there's so many Indians, so much of exchange of people and other things, English-speaking country, that so many Indians emigrating to. Having a good deal of free trade agreement with Australia is very important. I'm very glad that India has managed to finalize that, but I really hope when we look at Australia, India is reminded about the fact that we need to finalize that with the US and the UK.
Yeah, and I think the next big event at a global stature is going to be the Quad Summit next year, and India, Australia, both sort of being great partners of the Quad ecosystem as well, and Justin Trudeau there.
His Excellency Mr. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
It's been difficult relationship with Canada of late, with a lot of chatter and talks, of course, of Canadian administration trying to protect pro-Khalistani elements, and as a result of which we've seen at least at least the relationship taking a beating, at least not officially, but the optics of it looks like it has taken a beating of late.
Definitely, in the recent past, definitely that has been a big bone of contention, between India and Canada. But every time that happened, all I could think of was that how many Indians live in Canada? How many Indians still want to go to Canada? how much trade happens between India and Canada, traditionally speaking, how much it can be taken forward. They need human resources. They need, they don't have the population to sort of expand what they are doing. So that's the reason why they look for people to emigrate, to come to Canada and take up some of the jobs over there. Indians have been a great, important player in developing Canada
Absolutely.
itself. So, same way you don't want a Ukraine war sort of, destabilizing equations across the world. You can't have one Khalistan issue that destabilizes other good things that happen in India and
I think
Canada.
India has made it very clear that we will not tolerate Khalistani voices coming out of Canada and trying to question India's
but I'm only thinking
sovereignty, and you're thinking economics, and
we hope that enough.
Geopolitics will not overshadow economic relationships between the two countries.
Her Excellency Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission.
And that is the President of the European Commission walking in to be greeted by the Prime Minister. European Commission, of course,
the battles
trade,
that their own battles with the big tech out there. I think that's a whole new debate, which I don't think the G20 will be able to participate in or influence in New Delhi. But I think European Trade Commission literally at loggerheads with Alphabet, with the Meta, with practically every big tech company out there. I think data security is something which is absolutely a concern, not just to the European Trade Commission or the European region, but
now
even to
even India.
I think even India, and the fact that that data privacy, data security, we've passed the DPDP, right, the Digital Data Protection Bill, and heavy penalty there likely to be imposed on any case of data being infringed or transmitted, by the holders or the owners of the data to a third party. So I think India is also moving in that direction of data privacy. But government again having a complete right over every piece of data emerging from India is a concern. And when we talk about these large investments being made in data centers in India, and these bills that we are trying to enact by way of, again, the DPDP as well as the Digital India bill, which is likely to be tabled in the winter session of the Parliament, I think we may run into some challenges with companies and countries that we are importing technology from or partnering with when it comes to creation of data centers, creation of semiconductors, manufacturing of AI-based architecture. All of that will need data to operate, and that data protection.
We want to house that data in India, and we're building capacity for that. Reliance is doing it. It's partnering with global companies to do it. So essentially, the idea is to keep Indian data within the Indian shores, within the Indian borders.
His Excellency, Mr. Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany.
Mr. Olaf Scholz, His Excellency Olaf Scholz, being in India, Germany, a huge trading partner, and as Kartik has been saying all this while, Germany should be coming towards India, with especially keeping in mind what is happening with its economy, the degrowth in its economy, and
technically the first country to hit recession.
Yes,
to witness a degrowth.
2 quarters of degrowth, and that continues into the 3rd quarter as well. I think one country which
the biggest economy of Europe.
The biggest economy of Europe, and the first one to enter technical recession at a time when we were talking about the US heading towards recession and
Germany beat US
and UK heading towards recession. I think Germany really facing a difficult challenge right now of keeping its economy afloat, and there is absolutely a great need for investments to go into Germany, and the fact that it will have to come out of the shackles of recession. Given the fact that there are so many auto brands that that come out of Germany, and India being, of course, selling luxury cars like no tomorrow. I think we have enough and more Indians buying the Mercedes and the BMWs and the Audis and the Volkswagens and the Volvos.
German brands are in competition with themselves in India.
It's interesting the way you put it.
But Volvo is from Sweden, but you've got Mercedes, you've got BMW. I mean, iconic German brands, and Indians, when it comes to luxury cars, without debate or discussion, fundamentally go straight towards a German brand.
Absolutely.
Trusted, reliable, and expensive.
It's
of
luxury
course,
cars, Kartik.
With trust
You
and
want other things,
reliability
you try
comes
South Korean
expense.
cars. You want regular
And Chinese cars. Would you like some Chinese
I
cars,
don't think government
perhaps?
of India will let me buy Chinese cars in India.
Good
Look at what is
point,
happening
good
with
point.
MG, look at what is happening with BYD. But yeah, I think coming back to Germany, the interesting story from Volkswagen there comes from the fact that even Indian companies like Mahindra and Mahindra are dipping into this open ecosystem that Volkswagen has been able to create when it comes to components and parts that go into electric vehicles, electric mobility. And I think there is a very clear-cut target of all luxury brands in Germany to have 70 to 80% of their fleet being all electric by the turn of the decade.
And it's interesting because they're importing the same philosophy here in India. Just yesterday, I was reading about Mercedes' plans to have at least one of every 2 vehicles they sell in India by 2030 to be an electric car. So they're the same philosophy of they're hoping to also apply in India. And you know, since we keep talking about electric vehicles, perhaps more and more German companies are bringing in their electric vehicle philosophy to India, which augurs well for us and is in line with our own expectations of an electric fleet,
and
a 50%
face it,
electric
I
fleet.
think when it comes to technology,
Miss
Nothing
Giorgia
beats Germany.
Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy.
There you go.
The
Giorgia
Italian
Meloni,
Prime
Prime Minister of
Minister.
Italy. I want to know what kind of pizza partnerships we can have with them because it's really important. Again, the similarities between Italy and India as a country, ancient cultures, their food is world
The
over
language,
famous.
the culture.
Language,
absolutely.
people who are passionate about their language, people are passionate about their culture, people are passionate about their economy doing well, and that's the reason why, you know, after a particular stage, they even went to China to improve their economy, but clearly that didn't work out. So there's a space over there where India can jump in. And to start with, for Indian tourists wanting to go to Spain, and even for that matter, Italy, you know, there are no direct flights. I think maybe first thing we can start discussing with Giorgia Meloni is how soon we can have direct flights instead of having to take a flight to whichever carrier you're using and having a stopover and then going to Italy/Spain. So I think we used to have direct flights to Milan once upon a time, and I think Air India now.
Air Italia
And Air
used to
Italia
fly
used to
direct
operate
Delhi
But
to
now
Milan.
Air India, the newly revamped Air India, has said that there's going to be direct flights to Milan. So
Hopefully.
fingers crossed. So, and
His Excellency Mr. Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan.
Well, the Prime Minister of Japan also walking in, and with Japan, of course, we have important ties. Important ties, by the way, of you know, a trade agreement that we have with Japan that I'm hoping we'll push out the details of. But Japanese culture, I mean, since we're trying to find similarities, I think a dissimilarity between Japan and India is the demographic dividend that India has and Japan does not, and it continues to struggle and has put measures in place to ensure there is more people giving birth. They are not trying to just aid and abet that, but also hoping that there'll be a younger population that will be able to take reins, economic reins back.
absolutely, then there's no similarity this time around. Everything is an opposite. Japan is a country of one language. And you know, and Japan has got a very unique history in terms of, and also it's because of its topography. It is constantly susceptible to tsunamis, to earthquakes, to all kinds of natural disasters that has sort of shaped that culture. It's a stoic culture. They've seen Hiroshima, Nagasaki. You know, this is a culture and country very different to that of India, but the ties between India and Japan are as old as the hills. So, you know, Japan as a country, you know, is very important to India today. And as Kartik was mentioning, part of the Quad. We are a part of the Quad with Japan and the US and Australia. So, you know, another important trading / defense partner when it comes to protecting the Indian Ocean, Kartik.
Absolutely, and add to that, of course, you know, you have Japanese automobile companies again in India. You've got Honda, you've got
His
Suzuki,
Excellency
the
Mr.
Maruti
Yoon
Suzuki
Suk-yeol,
Partnership.
President
So
of the Republic of Korea.
Another car maker. Every time we look at a premier these days, we're all thinking car makers over here. Japan, of course, there's Toyota, Suzuki in India. Korean cars, the kind of growth they've witnessed in the last couple of years, especially a brand like Kia, an iconic Korean maker. And of course, it's a country that has hosted Hyundai for 3 decades now. So great trading partners.
And since we are talking about Korea, let's not forget their culture, the K-pop, and the dramas in which Netflix is heavily investing. You've got Indians watching K-dramas extensively. Their cosmetic industry, which is as big as it gets, bigger than anybody in the country, in the world.
Are you an Innisfree fan?
I'm
an Innisfree fan, one of the famous Korean brands in India.
Absolutely, and Korea, they're leading the game as far as drama is concerned. Their cultural heritage that they're showcasing to the world by the way of indigenously made movies, shows, dramas that are up for grabs, not just by India and in a population here in India, but by world. And Netflix also targeting Korea in a big way.
I think this whole democratization of content discovery, which is happening on OTT, 5 years
surprising and
ago,
wonderful.
How many Indians would have even heard of a Korean drama or K-pop? And this whole democratization of content which is happening, of content discovery through OTT, I think is a great story in itself to tell and to watch unfold right in front of our eyes. Because you've got in the same breath, if I can draw parallels with South Indian cinema finding a market across the world. It's not just about a mainstream India equal to Bollywood or South India making it to North India. No, I think that era is long over. We are actually looking at South Indian, South Korean, South everything, the global South becoming a global entertainment.
Usually the term going down south is a bad term.
President of the Republic of South Africa.
But not
South Africa now, from South Korea to South India to South Africa now. And the term South, Kartik, in English, for example, I don't know why the people who came up with the English language used the term things went south in a negative way.
As if in a bad way.
We need to redo that and go, things going south is actually fantastic.
Okay.
I think
so perhaps the negative connotation to
simple logic being that the maps always were drawn 2D. And on 2D, you had north on top and south at the bottom. So hence north and south. Our friend Amit often says that, hey, north of this, north of that. I think it's just visually when you see the map, you see that south is the bottom part of the hemisphere.
And nobody wants to be in the bottom.
Nobody wants to be at the bottom.
And while the banter between the two of you continues, I'm going to hand over.
Shweta, that's not fair. I thought you were making sense.